lecture on operational definitions. And when he finished, my head was spinning because I had begun to question what it was I thought I knew. So I'm looking forward to another head spinning exercise this morning. John Edelman is an associate professor of philosophy at Nazareth College of Rochester in Rochester, New York. His special interest is the relations between knowledge, pride of workmanship, and quality of work in contemporary America. And he introduced some of us to the writings of Simone Weil. It's been a very challenging and interesting experience for me to read her work. John challenged us to think last year, and I've been looking forward to another stimulating experience as an added student. I know you share my desire to begin a thoughtful journey with John as our leader. So join me in welcoming Dr. John Edelman.
Thank you, Gypsy. I remember that meeting too. Actually, what I remember is a rather skeptical look in the far back of the room, a skeptical look on your face. But I'm very pleased to be here. I enjoyed being here last year, and I'm delighted to have been invited back. I suppose that's because very often I don't get invited back. People often think once is more than enough. But it is a pleasure to be here. Going by my experience last year, I expect you will be a delightful audience to work with. My topic today was suggested to me by a remark of Dr. Demings in Out of the Crisis. This remark simply barriers against realization of pride of workmanship may in fact be one of the most important obstacles to reduction of cost and improvement of quality in the United States. Now, the barriers referred to here may be of very different sorts, I think, so their removal may present us with very different sorts of problems. And those of you who heard me speak here last year won't be surprised if I note that some of these problems will be convergent in nature and some of them divergent. Now, I have a second overhead here to remind those of you who were here last year and to confuse those of you who were not. Okay. What do I mean by convergent and divergent problems? I spoke last year about convergent problems, understanding them to be problems that permit a solution, right, that can be written down and passed on to others who can then apply the solution without having to reproduce the intellectual effort by which the solution was initially devised. Right? Now, the important thing about that for today is that these are problems you needn't really understand. You needn't understand how solutions are arrived at. You just need to be able to follow directions and you can solve the problems, right? And I think there are many of those, right? And the contrast is simply that with what I call divergent problems, which don't permit of any such rote solution. Instead, in these cases, what's required is what I call, borrowing here from E.F. Schumacher, a kind of balancing of opposites. Whether the opposites, and we will come to some of these today, be the balancing of a certain kind of freedom among individuals with the need for some kind of conformity or obedience to a procedure, balancing of discipline and spontaneity. That is a kind of balance that I think is essential in education, right? But one, again, that you can't achieve in any rote fashion. In fact, again, you can't achieve it unless you understand something of why it's so important, right? And that's some of the contrast with the convergent problems. Or another case, order or creativity. These are all very, very similar, right? Part of what I'm going to suggest today is that the problem of pride of workmanship is, in fact, a divergent problem, right? So in this way, my remarks this morning are an opportunity to return to at least one of the themes that I introduced last year. But it's also, my remarks this morning are also an opportunity to revisit another theme from last year, namely what I called the limit of techniques, right? I'm very good with overheads. I mean, not really a lot of experience. Actually, chalk and slate, that's what I prefer. But the limit of technique. Well, you may not be impressed, but I'm impressed. I mean, I've got these overheads. They're up there. You can see them, right? This is a limit to the application of convergent solutions to problems. Right? A limit to the application of solutions that can be just written down or somehow expressed and passed on to others who can then, in a rote fashion, apply them. Right? Or, as I tried to talk about last year, fill it out a little bit more, it's a limit to the successful application of skills divorced from understanding. And I wanted last year, as I would today, to talk about the conjunction of skill and understanding as art, right? As distinct from technique. Right? There are connections here, I think, with Deming's remark, right? There is no substitute for knowledge. Okay? Now, this limit, there are a variety of things that contribute to it. Part of it is just, and again, this harkens back to last year, what I call the contingent nature of the world, the fact that things are not entirely predictable, right? So techniques alone, you'll be helpless in the face of novelty. What I call novelty changes the element of the unpredictable. But this limit is also set in part by, at least my understanding, of the nature of human beings. And that's something I will have to talk about at some length this morning, right? Because that, of course, is what's going to make pride of workmanship a decidedly divergent problem, right? Still, my main concern this morning is to get at something that I call the paradox of management. Because it is, I think, a paradox, and I think it constitutes one of the more significant impediments to the entire quality movement, whether in business or education or government, coming to grips with this paradox. Right? But as you can imagine, it's going to take some doing to get to that paradox. So here we go. All right. Let me start with this a problem. When Dr. Deming suggests a connection between pride of workmanship and quality of work, right, he's not the first person to do so. Simone Weil, Gypsy referred to Simone Weil, she discusses that. Right? But if there is the sort of connection that he suggests there is, right, between pride of workmanship and quality of work, then the cultivation of pride within any organization will be one means of encouraging quality of work, right? And perhaps as a result, quality of product, right? But if this is right, then it certainly seems to me it would be useful to ask what sort of working conditions, in what sort of working conditions can one actually feel pride of work, right? Under what conditions is pride possible, and what conditions of work militate against such pride? What conditions demean rather than ennoble the worker? Right? Because those are the conditions that will constitute barriers to pride of workmanship. Now, I think that would be very useful to ask. What sort of conditions would encourage pride of workmanship? But I think if we would ask that question now, we'd be moving too quickly. how can we say what conditions will promote pride of workmanship unless we can say what pride of workmanship is? What is pride of any sort? Now, it may, the answer to that may seem obvious, but at least then, before we go any further, we should at least be sure that we agree about the obvious. Right? So, what is pride? And what is pride of workmanship? Consider this. Should we say there's a difference between feeling good about myself and being proud of myself? If there is a difference, what is it? Some people, it seems, can feel good while they do bad. Some people may manage to feel good about themselves while they're doing what you would judge to be poor quality of work. Perhaps they think the work and its quality don't matter. But can you feel pride of workmanship while you do not care about the quality of the work you're doing? Or should we say, the fact that you don't care about the quality of your work shows you have no pride of workmanship? Now, my point is that in that case, we seem to be saying that no one can feel pride of workmanship unless he or she feels some concern about the quality of the work he or she is doing. But if that's the case, then another question arises. How can I act out of concern for the quality of my work unless I'm able to recognize some standards of excellence in that sort of work? Now, what this question suggests, then, is that the possibility of pride of workmanship depends on my being able to judge or assess my work by reference to some standard of excellence, some standard of what is good or poor performance in the work at hand. Right? Now, the standard needn't be one of achievement. It may be a standard of effort, or it may be a standard involving both achievement and effort. Right? But in any of these cases, I'll have to recognize some standards of excellence. Otherwise, it's hard to see how I could come to take pride in what I do in my work, whether in the effort or in the results achieved. Right? Now, I haven't said anything yet about what these standards might be. So far, my only point has been this. I'll be able to understand your claim to be proud of your work only to the extent that I can see some standard of excellence against which you measure what you actually do in your work. I needn't even share or approve of the standard. I might not even approve of the work. After all, I can understand a man taking pride in his achievements as a jewelry thief, even if I don't approve of the theft. All I have to do is to see that this thief meets or exceeds the normal standard of what it is to be an accomplished thief. He's particularly creative or imaginative in the way he goes about it. Right? So, now, I'm trying to make a point here about the very nature of pride. You see, I asked, is there a difference between pride of workmanship and feeling good about myself? And what I'm suggesting is the difference, and this may be a little puzzling, the difference is not so much in what I may feel, okay, as it is in the connection between whatever it is I am feeling and some standard. Right? We tend to think of feelings, I mean, they go on inside you, right? They certainly don't go on over in the closet, just on their own, feelings wandering around the building. No, feelings are in people, right? But how you identify your feelings, right, is connected with things that are outside you. And in this sense, outside in the sense that there is a standard here. Feeling good and feeling pride, part of the difference is in the fact that the one requires a standard of excellence. Right? That's how we come to know pride. Right? And we may come back to that, or I may have to say more about it. But right. So I'm suggesting there can't be any pride of workmanship apart from recognized standards of excellence. And what's so important about this is that if it's correct, it means we can't encourage pride of workmanship unless we have some definition of standards of excellence appropriate to the work being done. Right? Again, whether these be standards of achievement or effort or both. Right? Now, I can't try to establish such standards here. Right? They'll have to be determined by the particular work at hand. Right? But the work is only part of the equation. But the standards will be standards of excellent work, right? And the work will be done by a worker, and the worker will be a human being who works. So in a sense, the standards of excellence that I'm interested in here will be standards of excellent human work. But now we've got a new problem. How are we going to identify standards of excellent human work without some understanding of what a human worker is? That is, unless we have some understanding of what kind of being this is that is doing the work. I trust we're not thinking that a human being could take pride in being an excellent conveyor belt or a first-rate screwdriver. Now, I can bring the point of that rhetorical question, or that can be brought out by a little example. Imagine a human being who's to count blades of grass on suburban lawns outside a large city, tagging each blade counted so as to be sure that none is counted twice. Now, an average worker can tag up to 2,400 blades in an hour for as many as 5 hours a day. And on its own, this will be a significant physical and mental achievement. It's not easy to perform the same action repeatedly for many hours, kneeling, lying, or crouching on the ground. So, perhaps we can imagine someone taking pride in the fact that he manages to tag 3,000 blades in an hour, or in the fact that he can keep at it for 6 hours, right? Not just 5. But in the case I want to imagine here, this blade counter, right? It's important to recognize that this work is done simply because in this society, everyone who is to have food to eat must do something to earn it. It doesn't much matter what. Okay? The work of blade counting has no other purpose at all. It merely allows those who do it to say that they have worked for their keep. Okay? In fact, it doesn't even matter if you go back and count the same blades the next day. That's irrelevant. All that matters is that you put in your time and tag the blades. Okay? The counting of blades makes no other difference to this society. Now, even if we allow that someone could take some pride in the sheer stamina they exhibit in doing some of this work, could one take pride in the work? Right? Now, I don't think so. Right? At the end of the day, what has this worker accomplished? Well, perhaps he's fed his family, and he can take pride in that. But I'm not asking about that, right? He may take pride in the fact that he's fed his family. I was asking, can he take pride in the work, not in its consequences? Right? And one reason why I don't think he can is simply that the work has no purpose. Right? What is there to be proud of? Compare this to the case of the thief. You might notice, you might say, well, the purpose of the thief is evil, wicked. Right? His work serves an evil purpose, that is stealing from others. But nonetheless, I thought it possible for the thief to take pride in his work. But I didn't connect the pride, in that case, with the purpose of the work. Right? I connected it with his creativity in the work, right? His imagination. Right? And there's little or no room for this in the case of the blade counter. Right? In fact, what I want ultimately to suggest is that it's precisely because of this lack of purpose, right, combined with the absence of any opportunity for creativity. See the two together. No purpose and no room for creativity. Right? It's that combination that makes the work of the blade counter work in which no one really can take pride. In fact, it's in these respects that the work does not, as I want to put it, fit the worker. Right? And that is what makes, I want to say, what makes pride of workmanship impossible. Right? To put it a little differently, in this case, there's no human workmanship to be proud of. Okay? Now, in putting it that way, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So what I want to do for a minute is just regroup. I'm worried about Gypsy's spinning head. Okay, okay. So far, what have I been doing? I'm suggesting that there can be no experience of pride of workmanship apart from the recognition of some standards of excellence, standards of what is to count as excellent work. But now, I'm also suggesting that the standards of excellent work, right, cannot play any role in the achievement of pride of workmanship unless the work itself fits the worker. That is, unless the work is appropriate to a human being who is the worker. Which leads to the question, what sort of work does fit a human worker? If what I've said so far is even roughly correct, then we can't hope to promote pride of workmanship unless we can say what sort of work does and what sort of work does not fit the human being who is the worker. And how are we going to do that if we can't give some account of what a human being is? Some account of the nature of the worker. It seems to me that only then could we say what sorts of work are consistent with a being of this sort and what kinds of work are not. Right? So, unless we give some account of what it is to be a human being who works, I don't think we can get very far with the problem of pride of workmanship. Right? Now, here I'm going to borrow from Aristotle, right? Ancient philosopher. In fact, I'm borrowing some of his vocabulary so that we can try to talk about this. Right? Because I want to ask, what is a human being? Right? And in a sense, that's to ask, what are, at least what Aristotle would call, the essential characteristics of a human being? What makes any being, any thing, count as a human being? Right? And this is where I think Aristotle's vocabulary is some help. It will help us in particular to see that the problem of pride of workmanship is a divergent problem. Right? And it will also show us something. This vocabulary that I'm going to introduce here will help us to see something more about what I've called the limits of technique. In particular, the limits of any management or problem-solving techniques in cultivating pride of workmanship. Right? And that's when we'll meet the paradox of management. So, first then, to Aristotle. What is a human being? Aristotle's answer to this can be presented by way of a method known as logical division. Right? It's simply a method of classification by dichotomy. Right? He thought that everything, all the things in reality, could first of all be divided into two sorts. So, the kinds of things there are. First, things he called substances and things he called accidents. Now be careful. Accidents. Not things that happen by chance. All right? No. The difference is this. Substances are things that, he'd say, exist on their own. You're a substance. I am. The watch is. The chair is. Right? Accidents. It's not, as I say, things that happen by chance. It comes from, the roots are Latin, sort of belonging to. Right? Accidents are things that don't exist on their own. They only exist in what he calls substances. Right? Now, the way I usually explain this in my introductory logic courses where students meet this distinction, I say, look, if I tell you to bring me a dog, you can bring the dog, put it up here on the table. Here's a dog. Right? Just bring me a dog. Set it up on the table. Now, bring me blue. Now, somebody says, well, okay, bring a can of paint. No, I don't want the paint. I just want the blue. Right? Bring me a sheet of paper that's blue. Put the paper down. I don't want the paper. I just want the blue. Right? Bring me 6 inches. Well, whatever you bring me, I'm going to send you back. Right? Because I don't want whatever you're bringing me. I just want the 6 inches. Okay? Now, you see, philosophy is funny, isn't it? I mean, there are jokes in here. That's the fun of coming here. You people actually get the jokes. Hey, imagine what happens when an audience doesn't. Right. Stop imagining that. Get back to the work here, okay? Right. No, you can't bring me 6 inches without bringing me 6 inches of something, right? Quantities are accidents. They only belong to things. They don't exist on their own. Colors are accidents. They don't exist on their own. They only exist in other things, right? You can bring me the dog, and the dog will have a certain color. Right? It will fill a certain quantity of space. Okay? But the filling of space, the having of color, those things, they don't exist on their own. They exist in the dog. Okay? So, he says, everything that you can name, right? Quantity, color, place, is either a substance or an accident. Either it has an existence on its own, so you can bring it up and put it on the table, so to speak, or it doesn't. It exists in something else. Right? All right. What about all these substances? Let's talk about those. Everything that is a substance, Aristotle thought was either corporeal or incorporeal. Aristotle at least wondered whether there weren't immaterial things. So things that exist on their own, but you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell them. Right? Immaterial or non-bodily, incorporeal substances. Right? But whether there are or not, right? See, he's interested in the possibilities. What possibilities are there? Everything is either a substance or it's an accident. If it is a substance, then either it's a bodily one or it's not. Okay? And among those that are bodily, every one of them is either sentient, that is, able to have sensations, so it's an animal, or non-sentient, and so a plant. Right? You're a bit gullible this morning, actually. No one's going to, right, at least a few heads are shaking. What about Venus flytrap? Okay, yeah, he knew they're out there, and they really presented puzzles to him, right? But, right, now, and then look, this is the point about vocabulary. Does everything fit the dichotomies he's setting up? Well, maybe not. Yeah, but you couldn't even identify those things if you didn't have the dichotomies to start with. Right? It's a vocabulary. It's a useful way of talking about things. Right? Does everything fit perfectly? No, that's just another class. Right? The ones that fit this side of the dichotomy, the ones that fit this side, and the ones that don't fit any. Okay. Now we can talk about those. Right? It's like, I may have said this even last year. You know, if you go walking in the woods and all you know is there are trees, then you have an experience of trees. Okay? If you know there are oaks and elms and beeches and other trees, you have an experience of oaks and elms and beeches and other trees. Everything is not an oak, an elm, or a beech. Right? But even if some things are just the other trees, that becomes a classification, and your experience of walking in the forest is quite different. Okay? So I don't want to get hung up on whether everything absolutely fits the dichotomies he's setting up. Right? What I'm after, and what he was after really, is a vocabulary that enables us to talk about even the things that don't fit. Okay? But, all right, let's take the sentient, living, corporeal substances. That is the animals. And he thought they're either rational or non-rational. Right? Now, which ones fall into which category? There may be some question about that, right? But there are the two categories, okay? Well, he's giving an account, you see. He's giving an account of what a human being is. Right? On his view, a human being is a rational. Now, I've got to be careful, right? He wasn't that stupid. He knew people were somewhat regularly irrational, right? But your cat is not irrational. Right? Your parakeet isn't irrational. To him, it's just non-rational, right? You have to be able to reason, to think. You have to have ideas to be either rational or irrational on a given day. The point is, you're a thinking being. You have an intellect, he would say. You're capable of, one of the keys here, you're capable of speech, right? Because you have concepts and ideas that you can express through speech. Okay? All right, but for our purposes, right, the bottom line here is, in his view, and again, it's the way of talking that I'm interested in, a human being is a rational animal. That's to say, a sentient, right, living, corporeal substance capable of intellectual activities, right? Thought. All right, so what has that got to do with the pride of workmanship, right? Well, this, right? What follows from this? If a human being is a rational animal, right? It's an animal. So it has sensations, appetites, right? Desires. But in Aristotle's view, unlike other animals, the human being, as rational, is capable of thinking about its desires, its appetites. Right? And so it's capable of having what he called rational appetites. Right? That's to say, a human being is capable of having appetites or desires that have been shaped by thought. Okay? So that, for example, the difference between you and your cat. You may desire to hear the symphony on Saturday. Your cat has no desire to hear the symphony on Saturday. Right? Why not? The cat doesn't like music? Right? No, it makes no sense to talk about your cat having that sort of desire. Why? Because your cat has no concept of a symphony. Right? Well, I know, there's always somebody who thinks his or her cat does, but right? I'm not even going to try to deal with that one. Okay? No, you see, there's certain desires you can have only because you have thoughts. Right? It's only because you have concepts, particularly, and concepts can carry you, in a sense, into the future, that you're able to have certain kinds of desires, right? And then shape your actions according to those desires, right? And that's what Aristotle called will. The will. It's this capacity to shape your actions toward a goal, right? A goal that is itself grasped somehow intellectually, you see. Not just, food in front of me, eat. No, something further along than that, all right? Okay, now, all of this, you see, I think enables me to reformulate the question that I started with regarding conditions in which people can experience pride of workmanship, right? I want to reformulate that question in this way. Under what conditions can a free thinking being perform excellently as a worker and so experience pride of workmanship? See, I connected the problem of pride of workmanship with the problem of saying what kind of worker a human worker is. Right? We want the human worker to take pride in the work. Right? But the human worker, now I'm suggesting, is a rational animal. Now I've thrown in free, okay? Yes, because that was the point I made when I said you could shape your actions toward the purpose that you can conceive of, the goal you can conceive of. If you can't conceive of the goal, you can't shape your actions. If you can, then you have the possibility of shaping your actions to suit that goal, right? And that's where the element of freedom will come in, right? So now, this question then, it is just a reformulation, right? But it's an important reformulation because I've introduced this idea of freedom and rationality, or the capacity for thought, right? So at this point, what I can suggest is pride of workmanship will be possible wherever a human being can exercise freedom and thought in the execution of the work. Right? So under what conditions is pride of workmanship possible? My suggestion is it's possible where both freedom and thought, the exercise of freedom and thought, are an essential part of the work. Right? Because these are the features that will set human work apart from the work of a mule or a machine. All right? All right. Okay. On the basis of what I've said so far, then, we might say there are two essential elements to work worthy of a human being. And you see, this is part of what I've been working toward. I talked about work that is appropriate to a human being, a fit between the worker and the work. But now I want to say that a bit differently. It's not just a fit like pieces in a puzzle. Right? What we need is work worthy of a human being. That's a certain kind of fit. Right? I mean, the horse may fit the harness. The worker may fit the work. Right? Not the same kind of fit. This is why I say work worthy of a human being. Right? And I'm going to call that free work. Right? So these two essential elements, it must be possible, right? And here's the element of freedom. Right? It must be possible for the worker to consent to the worth of the work. And that, of course, will require some understanding of the purpose and importance of the work. Right? And the second element, corresponding to this aspect of thought, I want to suggest it must be possible for the worker to exercise some degree of autonomy in the course of doing the work. There has to be some room for exercise of thought. right? Some element of decision making, even if it's slight. Right? And I try to express these here right, in this way. Right? What I'm calling free work, or work appropriate to a human being, work to which one can consent. I'm going to talk a little more about that, but it has to be possible for the worker to see the worth of the work. And secondly, it must be work that requires thought, decision-making, right? That's where the exercise of that capacity for thought will come in, right? And now, you see, instead of just putting those up there, right, I hope you have some understanding of why I say these particular things. Why these conditions? Well, because the human worker is the sort of being it is. Right? If we hadn't taken that little excursus through Aristotle, I'd just be putting up here conditions, and you might say, well, why those? So what I'm trying to do is suggest a why here, not just that these are the conditions, but why they are. Right? But then I add a caution here. It's at least arguable that in our society, there's a deep-going prejudice against manual labor. Right? A prejudice to the effect that manual labor is somehow in itself demeaning to a human being. But there's no necessary connection, right, between manual labor and unfree or demeaning labor, as I see it. On the contrary, right, this is the thing you have to watch out for. Physical or manual labor can be perfectly free in the sense in which I'm speaking of it, right, while highly intellectual labor can be highly unfree. A good deal of computer work is far more machine-like than any laying of sewer pipes will ever be. Right? So there's my little caution about manual labor. Right? Secondly, I guess, another caution that I realize I need to add here. I say free work. Right? Free work is not work in which I do as I please. Okay? I mean, there's a certain conception of free. I want to be free. You know, that is, I want to do whatever I like. No. That's not what I mean. No work ever gets done simply by doing as I please. Okay? On the contrary, if there's a task to be done and you just do as you please, you probably won't get the task done, right? Or at least it'll be done badly, right? What I want to suggest is that free work, right? Free work is work done as I want to do it, provided that my wanting here, right? And this is where the element of thought becomes important. Free work is work done as I want to do it, provided that my wanting here is shaped by my understanding. My understanding of the nature of the work. And so my understanding of how that work is properly done. And you see now right there, standards have come back into play. The work makes demands on me by its very nature. I conform to those demands, right? Echoing now something I put up there earlier about divergent problems, balancing of opposites, right? Order and creativity, right? I've got to conform to the demands of the work. There is something to be done, not just anything to be done. It's something. It has its own identity. It makes its demands. I have to conform, right? But I can conform freely if I have an understanding of the nature of the work, and, again, it's work that I can judge worthy of a human being. Right? Okay. Now, the account I've given here, borrowing from Aristotle, suggests one route, and perhaps the only route, to the promotion of genuine pride of workmanship. Human beings will be able to take genuine pride in their work when it is free work done freely. Again, this doesn't mean doing as I please. It means the work is to be done for reasons comprehended and consented to by the worker, and done in ways that allow the worker to exercise some autonomy. Again, the worker is a rational animal, a being capable of guiding its own actions, right? Now, to demand of me that I think in my work, to demand that I think in my work, is to respect me as a rational animal. Right? And to deny me the opportunity to work as a thinking being is, I would suggest, to treat me as less than human. So, I'm suggesting then there are at least two conditions to be satisfied if we're going to cultivate pride of workmanship in a business or industry, or even in educational environments or in government, right? The work people are asked to do must be such as can be consented to. Right? Now, of course, no one can ensure that anyone will consent to do the work. That's another matter. I'm just talking about presenting people with the opportunity for pride of workmanship. Right? We can at least, we present that opportunity by offering people work worthy of their consent. Right? But secondly, we have to allow within that work the exercise of thought. Right? And in a sense, these go hand in hand. I would say work that doesn't require some exercise of thought will be unworthy. Right? Now, you might notice a fit here between with this first condition and some of what Dr. Deming has had to say about theory of a system and his discussion of psychology. Right? One way in which an individual can be brought to give consent to work, right, is to be shown its importance in relation to larger work. Right? And this point, I think, is very well brought out by the French philosopher I referred to earlier, Simone Weil. Right? So I would, let me just show you this. I thought it best to put this on an overhead, and we'll just read through it. Right? Weil writes, "In all work, one of the most powerful incentives is the feeling of an end to be accomplished and a job to be done." Now, she wrote this in 1933, I believe, maybe 1936. She, as a young woman, she was born in 1909. As a young woman, she was very concerned about the plight of workers in France, and thought that she should go work in a factory to try to understand what their lives were like. So she did. She went and worked in a factory. It nearly killed her. She was quite incompetent, mechanically speaking, and and she was not physically. She was not very, very strong. So it nearly killed her. But this is part of what she took out of the experience. Again, in a factory, and especially in the operation of machines, this incentive is often completely absent. When for the 1,000th time a worker brings a part into contact with a machine tool, he finds himself, aside from the fatigue of it, in the position of a child who has been put to stringing pearls in order to keep him out of mischief. The child obeys because he dreads punishment and looks forward to a piece of candy. But the only meaning he can find in his activity, is conformity to an order given by someone who has authority over him. The case would be otherwise, she says, if a working man knew clearly from day to day, moment to moment, just what part he was playing in every step of the productive process and what place the factory occupied in society. See, not just the system within the walls of the factory. Right? If a working man's job is to drop a die punch on a piece of brass destined for some device in a subway, he ought to know it. Right? And knowing it, he may, can't compel it, but he may consent to the work. Right? But without the thought, right, without the understanding, he's like the child put to stringing pearls. Right? Now, what is the second condition I introduced, namely the requirement that work demand the thought of the worker, right? I do think here we have to recognize, as I'm sure nearly all of you or all of you do, that in the long run, no amount of financial or material compensation offsets what I want to call the simple insult of being treated like a mule or a machine. But that's just to say that pride of workmanship will be possible only when the work itself respects the nature of the worker. Right? And this is where, all right, here I make my pitch, right, for the study of philosophy, right? Even in business schools, should I say especially in business schools, right? Because, of course, I'm talking about connections between a philosophical understanding of what human beings are and the practical decisions that people make in business or industry or anywhere else. Right? How are we to respect the essential nature of the worker if we have no grasp of what that nature is? Right? And how shall we grasp what that nature is without, or with any clarity, if we have no vocabulary in which to talk about it? Right? I know that good philosophy does not itself make for good management. I'm clear about that. Right? It's not a sufficient condition, as logicians like to say, a sufficient condition for good management. But if there's any connection between pride and quality of work, and at least over the long haul, it seems to me there is a connection, then we can at least say, perhaps, that bad philosophy will make for bad management. Right? That's maybe the minimum here. But all right. Over the long haul, I want to say, and that is important, the long haul, you cannot, I think, get the most or the best out of human beings by treating them as less than human beings. But that, see, putting it just that way introduces a new problem, right? And really takes us to what I'm going to call the paradox of management here. Right? So, all right, let's ask how a human being might find pride of workmanship when working under conditions or within a system in which he's treated as something less than a human being, as, say, a machine or a mule. Right? And one possibility, of course, is to abandon pride of workmanship and instead to pursue pride in the subversion of the system. Right? At least by opposing or subverting the system, I can act as an autonomous, that is to say, free and rational creature. Right? But pride of workmanship itself, I think, will be impossible under these conditions. Right? And unless my arguments here are wrong, a human being can take pride only in freely conforming, right, himself or herself to the demands of a work that he judges worthy of a rational animal. So that to be compelled, again, to do the work of a machine or a mule will be to be denied the opportunity for pride of workmanship. Now, all right, this then suggests that if managers or leaders or any other sort of business or industry or any other organization are to get the most out of their workers, right, they'll have to acknowledge that these workers or employees are indeed human beings, and so offer them work worthy of human beings. Right? And that suggests that they'll not be able to treat these workers solely as means to their own ends. Right? After all, that would be to use or manipulate the workers. When, on the contrary, the workers must be given the respect due to them as human beings, not as objects to be manipulated. But of course, it will not be possible for employees or managers to show this respect to other employees or to subordinates, right, unless they understand what kind of respect is due to a human being. And this understanding, it seems to me, will be possible only for individuals who understand themselves what it is to be a human being. Right? And in fact, here again, we're meeting something else I referred to last year, that sort of practical wisdom that I talked about briefly, what is traditionally spoken of as prudence, right? A kind of art of good practical judgment, right? And I suggested last year, and I suggest again here, it is the essential virtue of the art of management, this thing I call prudence, right? But it now seems to depend on a certain philosophical understanding of what a human being is, right? Now, here's the paradox. If, over the long term, the most effective management requires, as I'm suggesting, an appropriate respect for other human beings as human beings, right? Because without the respect, workers will not experience pride of workmanship, right? Then the most effective managers over the long haul will be those who do not look on their subordinates, or employees or whatever, as mere means to their own ends, right? To the managers or the employer's ends, right? See, over the long haul, the most effective management, right, involves showing respect to the worker, right? But that respect requires that I see the worker as a human being, not as a mere object, right, or means to my own end, right? In other words, if this is true, see, in the long run, I'm saying on the one hand, you'll get the most out of your workers if you respect them as human beings, but you can't respect them as human beings so as to get the most out of them. All right? We'll try that one again. Okay? You see, you will get the most out of them. I mean, if this is right about pride of workmanship and the connection between pride and quality of work, right? You will get the most out of them if you respect them as human beings. But you can't respect them as human beings with the purpose of getting the most out of them. Why not? That's treating them as means to your ends, right? So, here's another way of expressing the paradox. The respect due to human beings, and through which human beings can be encouraged to do their best work, cannot be shown to people, cannot be shown to human beings for the sake of getting them to do their best work. Okay? See, the problem is the respect shown to human beings for the sake of getting them to do their best work will not be respect for them as human beings. It will be, I want to say, nothing but a technique of manipulation, which is not a form of respect. Another way to make the point is to say that there simply cannot be any technique by which to show respect to employees. Any technique divorced from an understanding of what other human beings are, right, of what is worthy of other human beings in their nature as free, thinking creatures, will be manipulation. And to manipulate a human being for my own purposes is hardly to show respect to that human being. I must respect my subordinates, my employees, whatever, as rational agents, doers, right? And yet, right, I must elicit from them a certain conformity. Conformity to the demands of the work to be done. Right? And that will require some discipline, some rigor, some adherence to standards of excellence. But of course, that's what makes pride of workmanship possible. And surely then this is where we see the divergent nature of the problem of pride of workmanship. Surely what we have here is a case in which we require a balancing of contraries, right? Nothing that could be achieved by the rote application of rule or a procedure, right? On the contrary, I would suggest, unless you've worked through the intellectual process, and that's what I've been trying to do with you this morning, unless you've worked through the intellectual process by which one can come to see the problem of pride of workmanship as a problem of balancing respect for the freedom of the worker with respect for the demands of the work, unless you've gone through the process in which you see those two forms of, or objects of respect, the worker and the work, right? And you see the importance of balancing those, right? Then you can't comprehend my talk about the paradox of management. Right? For the problem of pride of workmanship, as with all divergent problems, right, is one in which the description of the problem is a description of the solution, though I don't think solution is the best word there. You see, if you understand that the problem of pride of workmanship just is a problem of balancing respect for the worker and respect for the work, right, then you know what to do, right? Well, of course you do, right? You go balance these opposites, right? And for that, of course, there's no formula. What's required, again, I'd say, is prudence, right? All right, well, now, there's no guarantee, of course, that in showing respect to other human beings, the quality of their work will increase. Right? On the other hand, if it's genuine respect, right, this possibility that the quality of their work will not increase, if it's genuine respect, this possibility will not deter us from showing that respect to them. Right? Again, after all, if you are deterred from showing respect by the fact that it doesn't have the consequences you wanted, then it just wasn't respect in the first place. So we're left with our paradox, and let me put it up here, at least in one form, right? I say in one form, I want to say, let me put this up clearly. Well, it's a paradox. There's an element of clarity here that we're not going to achieve, but let's see. Here's the paradox as I see it. Only those who have genuine respect for human beings as free beings can show to others the respect that encourages pride of workmanship. Now that's where we began, right? Some connection between pride of workmanship, quality of work. How are we going to encourage pride of workmanship? What are the conditions in which that pride will be promoted, right? And now my suggestion is you can only show respect that encourages pride of workmanship if you begin with genuine respect for human beings as free beings, right? But those who would use respect as a means of encouraging pride of workmanship cannot possess that respect to begin with. Right? They'll be capable only of empty imitation, so capable only of technique, and incapable of encouraging pride of workmanship. When the respect becomes a means, it ceases to be respect. Right? Or as I put it here, the paradox lies in the fact that one of the means to promoting higher quality work cannot be available to anyone for whom it is merely a means of promoting high quality work. Right? It's available only to those who first care about the worker. It is a means available only to those for whom it is not a means, but an end. In sum, respect is not and cannot be a motivational technique. Okay? Thank you. We probably have a question out there somewhere. I believe 9:30 we have a little, is that right?
If you have questions, could you come to the mics?
John, can't we dissolve the paradox a little bit by removing the assumption that it's the manager's aim and not the workers? In other words, if it's a mutual aim, and that I am, instead of manipulating the worker into doing higher quality work, that in fact I am side by side with the worker trying to achieve a common aim, then the paradox is dissolved, is it not?
I'd surmise that when you take that view, well, why are you side by side with the worker?
We're both trying to achieve a common aim that we've at least consensed on.
And what is the aim?
It's not my aim. It's our aim. Well, building a better truck in my case.
And why would anyone do that?
Well, because people need trucks.
No, but you see, I mean, we're going to go on with a number of questions, right? I mean, why would anybody care that people need trucks? But at some point, I suspect you're going to give a description of something you think worth doing, and someone else thinks worth doing, a worthy task, right?
Yeah, but I'm not going to impose that. I mean, we've come
That's
together.
right.
We've come together. Yeah, there's a hiring practice, all that stuff. But
No.
somehow we've come together, and we're going to build the truck. And
Right.
that's
Not-
something we're doing together, as opposed to
Right.
the old style of management. I sit on high, and you do as I say. You know, sort of the Taylor approach.
Right.
I think, you know, it seems to me that if there is a consensus here, which, you know, we're trying very hard to build,
Right.
then the paradox is to some extent dissolved.
Well, yes, but because I don't know that I'd say the paradox is resolved. You're just describing a case in which encouraging pride of workmanship is not merely a means to your own end. That you're describing a circumstance in which people together consent to a task they judge to be worthy of them. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts going on, John, so I'm going to try and ask as coherent a question as I can. Is what you're talking about similar to what we hear when we're talking about the unconditional love you have for children, your child, no matter what the consequences of their behavior is? And are we talking about a real belief system about the human being being good and the essence of their being?
We're certainly in working in that realm here, though I think we have to be careful. Well, this is one way of getting at the concern I have. I think there is a kind of respect. I mean, I have learned a lot, again, from Simone Weil, and she talks about an unconditional aspect of this respect for another human being as a human being. Right? On the other hand, my employer is not my mother, right? Or if it is, it's just a matter of chance, or two, right? And God help me. Well, all right, God help her too. My concern, I think, could be expressed this way. I'm very uneasy when institutions call themselves families, right? And it's not because I think there's some great dichotomy between the two, but you know, you're not my brother, my family, or you're not my mother. It's an ancient question how I can have different obligations to different human beings. It's a great puzzle. I mean, and particularly the Judeo-Christian tradition, saying love your neighbor as yourself, and who's my neighbor? Well, just everybody, so I guess I'll love everyone the same. So why do I feed my children when I should be feeding children starving in Africa, and why do my children rate, right? I mean, it's a complicated, difficult business, but I don't want to say we all have the same relations to one another, but there is an element of the unconditional, right? But you've got to remember one of the things here, there is work. There's a task to be done, and it makes its demands on us, on me and on you, right? And that's what's bringing us together, to conform to those demands, the demands of what we take to be worthy work. And that's going to shape our relations. So, you see, I want to say, yeah, we're in that realm, but let's be careful. There are big differences, right? And it's messy. Yeah. Jack.
I guess first to comment, this is a great analysis of the second great lie, but never mind.
They
anyway.
didn't get the joke.
I know. Anyway, Alfie Kohn had three things: choice, content, and collaboration. And it seems like your two criteria fell very close to choice and content. Do you have any comments on either the lack of necessity for collaboration or how it might relate?
Yeah. Yeah, that may be, that may be something I need to say more about. Although, yeah, that may be, in that I'm imagining work that may be done in considerable isolation, even. But on the other hand, there's bound to be a collaborative element in that. I think it comes out, or I think the entry for that sort of talk is through what I'm calling the worthiness, the consent to the worthiness of the work. That's why I think we consent together. Well, back to Mark's point. So I certainly don't see anything at odds with Alfie Kohn's point there. It may have more to do with the context in which I do my work and the context in which you do your work. Collaboration looks like different things in those different places. But that's helpful, Jack. Yeah. Yes.
A comment about the workplace's family life. One of the things that Peter Block talks about is that as adults, we don't want to get into parent-child relationships, that's dysfunctional as adults, so
Yeah.
that's a problem. Also, I was wondering in terms of the earlier comment, if there is a mutual aim, is the paradox resolved? I'm wondering if, through consensus, I'm wondering if we reach that consensus through the actions you've just been talking about, that consensus is reached by working with that paradox. Does that make sense?
Is
the consensus on the aim,
right.
Is that worked out through addressing the paradox by focusing on that kind of discussion?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could be, or at least a lot of things could be cleared away, right? If we were clear that we wanted to avoid simply the use of one another, right? That might help us, that would be at least a start toward identifying a little more clearly what this common aim or this purpose is to which we're both going to consent. I think that concept of consent is a wonderful concept to work with.
Well, following on that, then, I don't know if Dan Osterreich talked about this or not, but one of the things that I think is coming to the fore in the area of human interaction has to do with each of us as individual workers finding our own voice and using that voice, so that if we're in a situation in which we are being exploited, where does our responsibility fit, or is that a completely different paradox? Does it fit within the paradox you're talking about? What is the individual's responsibility not to be exploited,
Right.
to only do meaningful work?
Well, yeah, now, though I think one of the things we're approaching here is simply the tragedy of people's lives, right? Where these aren't options. I mean, in political theory, right, social contract theory, which figures strongly in, of course, our own political heritage, the idea is philosophers think, okay, well, how do you get a society started, and why do people abide by these rules and this sort of thing? So let's imagine there is no society. We're going to all get together, this state of nature. Everybody's out there on their own, and we're going to come together and we agree to this contract, right? And because I get something out of it, you get something out of it. Well, it's a sort of win-win situation, so we all buy into it. And this is why you should obey these rules, because you sort of bought into them simply by being a part of this society. And David Hume, the Scots philosopher, objected to this. He said, right, you tell me I've consented to be governed. You might as well tell a sailor in the mid-Atlantic, roughly something like that, you might as well tell a sailor in the mid-Atlantic that simply by being on ship he's consenting to the orders of the captain, as though what? He were free to leave? Well, the reality of many people's lives is they aren't free to leave. They've got nowhere to go, right? So there's there's a responsibility of a sort, you know, I think it's...
The problem that I have, in part, and Peter Schultes brought it up the other day, the whole concept of empowerment is
Right.
still that paternalistic hierarchical model, and that I somehow have that a right to empower someone else. And that struck a deep nerve within me that, yeah, that makes sense. We don't have that.
A right to empower people?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Peter, my help. Yeah, we were born empowered, he said. Yeah, and I tend to agree with that as well. And I do think people have other options, but that's maybe next year. Maybe you can help us with that.
All right. Okay. Hi.
I'm trying to understand a fundamental part of this paradox that you say if pride of workmanship is possible only where workers are shown the respect due to them as free human beings, yet in the workplace often you see situations where they're not given that respect at all, and yet they have pride in workmanship. So is pride in workmanship something that is due to an extrinsic force such as being treated with respect, or could it simply be due to an intrinsic force that a person has pride of workmanship in spite of how they're treated?
Right. Those conditions aren't all settled by the person who happens, for example, to be the manager, right? There are conditions that may be written into the work itself to a certain degree. I mean, the work may just be worthy work in which I can take pride, right? And that's where you see institutions, in a sense, can compensate for the idiots they hire, right? Because they have a life of their own, right? And there is a work to be done, and despite what may go on in or through a particular individual or a number of individuals, the operation as a whole and the work itself provide the opportunity. I mean, an odd way to say it is, it may be the work that respects me, even if the manager doesn't. Is that okay?
John, just a question. I was thinking, you called this the paradox of management. And the thing
Right.
that occurs to me is that how's it any different for the managers than for the workers? Or said another way, aren't we all in the same situation? Because I was trying to think, if I was given a choice, and I've already made this choice a couple times in my life, if I was given the choice to be the blade counter or the manager of hundreds of blade counters, I'd prefer to be the blade counter.
Right.
It's less painful than
Yeah.
the other one. So
Yeah.
I just wondered, had you considered that this is sort of focused as if it's, again, we and they, like managers have it somehow good, and the workers have it horrible, and I don't see it that way.
Right. No, maybe it's better even to understand it as a paradox of, more generally, of leadership. Now, that still makes for a difference between the leaders and the led. On the other hand, I think however much we may want to shrink those differences, they're there. They are there. And so I do think it's a paradox that falls heavier on those in positions of leadership. Aaron?
If you worked for just the most disrespectful of your humanity type leader or manager, wouldn't the other shoe, for example, wouldn't treating that manager as though he or she had a choice in how they treated you be exactly what you're talking about as far as how a worker? I mean, you would be possibly what Oestreich is talking, although I didn't hear his talk. How do you find your voice? Well, you look at your manager as though they also had choices to do something other than what they're doing. Would that not be true?
Right. Yeah. The question of respect working, so to speak, in the other direction. I will be treating my manager or whoever, my leader, disrespectfully, right? Insofar as I view him or her as a kind of helpless, all right, not a pawn, but maybe a rook, right? A helpless rook. There's potential there, isn't there? Rhymes with and things of that sort. No. That's very important. I think that's very important, and I wish I had said something more about that because well, yeah. I guess I didn't say more because I had no more to say, but thank you. Thank you. That's valuable. Yeah. One.
John, to bring it down to very practical kind of levels, if you'll pardon the excursion from the heady places where we've been, there's a person whose business is in distress, and he asked me to help. Mm-hmm. And his business is rebuilding automobile engines and putting them into cars. Mm-hmm. And his distress is that he's very, very busy, but he's not making any money. Mm-hmm. And he's working very, very long hours, but he's not showing any profit. And he and his brother have worked at this for a long time, and they've never been able to take a salary out of this enterprise. And so they feel distressed. It's 8 years now, and they think they ought to be making money. I think sounds like a reasonable expectation. As I encountered him, he's got one particular activity, which is the way that he deals with the people who actually do the work of replacing the engines. And he's decided to put those people on piece rate, if it were. They make a certain amount of money, and he says that I think that the reason he does this is because he doesn't know how to boss them. He says, we tell him, piece rate will solve that. You do what you can do, and as long as you can do 3 a week, then that's the minimum, and that's okay. it seems to me that I see some of the things that you were talking about in his piece rate example. He says, I'm going to stay out of their way. That
Right.
it's worthwhile work. These people need their cars. But I also feel that he's really missing something by his structure. I'm not intervened in that yet because I'm still trying to unravel it. Would you help me unravel it?
Well, I'm not sure I can. I'll take, what is it about the structure? Yeah, there's something about the structure that makes you uneasy to start with. Is that right?
Yes, there is. The piece about the structure that makes me uneasy is that the folks don't have a basis of collaboration. While they cannot really totally work independently, their compensation structure looks like they can.
Right.
And so there's no way of improving and building, and the methods of improvement are denied them, as I see it.
Right, because the demands of the work are such that collaboration is really essential to doing what's to be done, in your view.
There are many times that collaboration,
Right.
in fact, occurs, but it is outside of their method of
Right, the structure doesn't encourage that kind of collaboration. It's more, it happens occasionally, but there's nothing built into the system to encourage it. But now the move he's making is not going to help, isn't going to touch that problem, right? Just by, as he says, just by standing back and letting them work it out. Although, you never know. I mean, it may be that they'd be able to work, that they would recognize the importance of the collaboration better than he does, but he may have set up a compensation system that isn't going to help them, right, that may divide them. Right?
That's my point, yes.
So that's the difficulty, right? The compensation system is really only exacerbating the problem. It is itself an expression of his failure to understand the nature of the work as essentially collaborative.
Or that portion of it that's collaborative.
Right,
yes.
right. He understands a lot of it, but he's missing that piece. And now he's only making things worse because he continues to miss that piece.
But on one hand,
Right.
your dichotomy model.
Right.
On the other hand, by recognizing them and allowing them to be independent agents, he seems to be acknowledging their pride in workmanship.
Well, yes, except the way he's setting it up is going to itself be an impediment to that, isn't it? Right? So he is, but the form in which you do that is going to matter. And in his case, it seems it's going to be a new impediment. Is that any help? Not much. Well, all right. All right.
I'm really sorry to do this, but we need to take a break and try to stay on schedule. So if you could, hold the question, because at the end of the day today, we have a discussion set up. And so keep your question. John will be here.
Yes,
Right?
I will be here.
Thank
Okay.
Hello, John.